let's give you another take on that story then. The country is eagerly awaiting President Cyril Ramaphosa's address to the nation this evening. The president has already declared a state of disaster, banned gatherings of over 100 people and severely restricted air travel. Many are speculating harsher measures as some citizens flout the call for social distancing. For more on this then, I'm joined by UCT constitutional law expert, that's Professor Pierre de Vos, to unpack the law in as far as this is concerned. So, Prof, short of declaring a state of emergency, we are now at state of disaster. Short of declaring a state of emergency, is it possible to have more stringent measures than what we've seen so far?
Yes, it is, because the Disaster Management Act provides for extensive powers to take measures, including there's a specific provision in Section 27 that says that it is empowered to restrict people's movement, either between areas or within an area, so within a suburb. So if I have no idea what the President will say and what experts are recommending, but if there is a need for further restricting movement of people, even from their houses, that is allowed for in the Disaster Management Act.
And how enforceable are these restrictions? Is it more of the same of trying to persuade people to stay at home, or are these actually enforceable?
Well, the restrictions on gatherings has attached to it a criminal sanction. So if you are going to be guilty of organizing a gathering of more than 100 people and so on, then you can be prosecuted and sent up to 6 months to jail. The provision on the liquor provisions, the provisions on site consumption and sale of liquor, for some reason that's not been made a criminal offence. I think that was just a mistake, so maybe that will also be corrected if there are new measures adopted tonight, but because clearly that is important to try and use the law also to stop people from congregating and potentially spreading the virus.
And there's a bit of speculation about whether or not the South African National Defence Force could be roped in to assist even before, in fact, meeting any threshold that would take us over that line of a state of emergency. Can this be done within the National Disaster Management Act and within the other laws that govern the deployment of the SANDF within our borders?
Yes, so the Constitution, if you read that with the Defence Act, it allows for the deployment, or as it sometimes says, employment of the National Defence Force inside the country to assist the police with certain measures. And that, in the terms of the Defence Act, that would include in situations where there's health emergency or whatever. So that is true, but there are limitations on what can be done by the military. The military is supposed to only act in support of the police and so forth. So as long as that is maintained, yes, the existing law allows for that.
But I also suppose in terms of such arms of service as the Military Health Service, for example, that is the defense force, but not necessarily frontline, soldiers who are going out there to engage in combat, but more of a medical role and field hospitals, etc. Talk to me, Prof, about the state of emergency, because, these are uncertain times, and many people who are old enough will have lived in a state of emergency, in states of emergency in the 80s, etc., but we've not had one since 1994. The way I look at it, it's, at this point, not a possibility, and you will clarify the requirements, that the requirements simply don't exist for a state of emergency right now, do they?
Yes, because of our history and because of the way in which states of emergency were used by the apartheid regime to try and suppress revolt and suppress people standing up against apartheid, the constitution makers defined and made it quite difficult to have a state of emergency. Yes, you can have a state of emergency if there's a real upheaval in the country, there's the life of the nation is threatened, if there's some other kind of natural disaster, but the Constitution says it can only be done to restore peace and order. So whether this situation complies with that, I mean, I don't know. It's never been considered by the court, so we don't really have authoritative interpretation. But it is clear from the Constitution that it is envisaged only as a last resort. Of course, if it is really necessary, if the expert says that this is the only way in which we can impose the measures that is going to stop this, then the government will have no choice. They will have to try and find a way. Yes, I'm at the moment, I really don't know whether that situation exists.
Lastly, Prof, indulge me then. This whole issue around declaration of state of emergency and the rights that are non-derogable, that continue to be enforced, whatever the circumstances. I noticed that they don't include, for instance, around the issues of non-discrimination, there are two bases on which that I think are critical, on the basis of gender, but also on sexual orientation. What gives? Why are those not included among the rights that would be protected no matter what?
Yes, so some kinds of discrimination cannot be derogated even in a state of emergency. Discrimination on race, sex, religion, and so on. Some kinds of discrimination can be derogated from. So there is some, if you have laws or regulations that discriminate, it might be acceptable. Why the makers of the Constitution made this distinction about some types of discrimination that could never be derogated in a state of emergency and others not, I really don't know. So, of course, there are some other guarantees in the Constitution. So if there was going to be discrimination imposed, the court can still test whether this is necessary to deal with the emergency. If it's not necessary, the court can nullify that provision still. So there's some kind of safeguard through the courts in the unlikely event in this context that such provisions could be abused.
Yeah, but you and I have gone further down the corridor than is likely at the moment. Thank you so much for your insights, Professor Pierre de Vos, there talking to me about the measures that can be added while staying somewhere between the national state of disaster, which is where we are, and a full-on national state of emergency, which seems quite unlikely at this particular point. He's been explaining what is possible within that threshold.